Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Frazer Grudgings, who's a senior consultant here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So today we're going to be talking about information security policies as they relate to ISO 27001. So Frazer, the first thing I want to ask you is basically what is an ISO 27001 information security policy?
That's a very good question. Well, it is a policy. It is a requirement of the standard. So any business that's setting about creating an information security management system and they want it to be compliant to ISO 27001, they're going to need to create one. But from my perspective, it is a central component of the ISMS of that management system, and that's because it provides, from a high level, what it is that an organisation should be doing in terms of information security. So that might be, you're focused on protecting data or customer data. It might be that you're focused on protecting your assets or your information in that respect. So it allows the business to sort of set that out clearly. That this is why information security is important to us, and we have a policy that supports that. In terms of other elements as to what it is, well, it's a way of documenting who has responsibility for information security within an organisation, and that can be, from a senior management perspective. You may have a managing director or chief executive officer. They ultimately have responsibility for the management systems, but then you may have somebody like an information security manager that has the day-to-day maintenance, and then you've also got the employees, and typically it's employees where culturally you're trying to bring on board a method of information security, and the policy helps support that sort of methodology, that stance, that strategy, however they want to determine it, taking things forward. It's sort of the linchpin that you can go back to and say, our policy stipulates, we want to protect customer data, and then everything can kind of flow from there in terms of, who should be doing what with regards to that customer data. If it's, a policy that you're creating from scratch, you want to try and make sure that it's appropriate to your organisation, and by that I mean in terms of your strategy or your focus. So again, if you are focused on protecting customer data, then you can clearly state that. However, you may have lots of different locations across the country or the globe, and you can use the policy to sort of reiterate, that's the approach that you're taking. Information security is relevant to all locations and all people in that particular respect. And also, because you're trying to make it appropriate to your business, there is the ability to, any company, any size, any industry can implement an information security management policy in that respect. So it doesn't restrict. It's almost a fluid thing that would just go with in terms of the direction that the business is trying to create in terms of their stance of information security.
So what do you need to include in your information security policy?
So that one, quite handily, within the standard, there is a list of things that they expect for the policy. So for clause 5.2, it's actually called policy. It does list the things that a business needs to ensure is within their information security policy. And that goes for any of the policies, within the ISO sort of families. But one of the first things you need to do is to consider any current or any sort of future legislation or regulation that is relevant to your industry and also information security. So typically we see when we look at clients' policies, they've made a reference to things like GDPR or the UK Data Protection Act, because it is pretty relevant to most industries, and it's also very relevant to information security. But occasionally you might find that there is something specific that the client has raised there that is unique to their industry. It needs to be aligned to your strategy and goals. So it's, when we talk about the context of the business, it's where you set out who you are, what is your strategy, what's your mission statement. Your information security policy needs to be aligned to that. It needs to support that. So as I mentioned before, the example is protecting customer data. If that is your mission statement, then your policy needs to be aligned to that in that respect. You may choose to have a strategy where you want to reduce information security risk or incidents. And again, you just make sure that that is captured within the policy itself, be it a statement or a paragraph, that kind of links to the strategy. One of the main things that you must include in the policy is some sort of reference to your objectives for information security. It gives you kind of two choices. It says you can either include those objectives, which we have seen some clients do, but that means that you've then got quite a lengthy information security policy, and you may not want to share the objectives to external parties. So it may be something that you choose to not necessarily include, but it also gives you the freedom to just say, okay, this is the framework for setting information security policies. And that usually is through management meetings, management review, or wherever there is senior management getting together to establish, okay, what are our objectives to help us deliver on that strategy and that policy, and then regular opportunities to assess how you're performing against those objectives. Is it on target? Is there the right resources, the right buy-in? Is it the right kind of objective? Does it perhaps need to be changed? So that's where that element of management review and discussion comes into the setting or the framework of the objectives. A lot of companies will state from a high level perspective, that they are focused on an objective of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which is kind of fundamental to information security. But what you can then do is, talk about how those objectives of the CINA are actually filtering down to the rest of the business. So from a confidentiality perspective, it may be that the objectives you set are all of your devices need to be have encryption. All of your staff need to have completed some confidentiality related training in terms of how they can deal with information internally, whether it's confidential, whether it's public, that kind of thing. And that's supporting the strategy of the high level objective of maintaining confidentiality. Coming down the list, I'm kind of referring to the standard here, which is quite useful because it does lay these things out in sort of bullet point fashion. You need to, obviously we talked about a commitment to satisfy applicable requirements, legislation such as GDPR and data protection. There is a commitment for continual improvement, which is obviously very central to the ISO sort of ethos. It's all about continual improvement. And that may be that you set an objective for employees to identify improvement opportunities, a certain number every quarter or every year. But the thing to bear in mind is that you are going to be challenged when it comes to audit, be that internal or external, to sort of demonstrate or provide evidence how you are continually improving your information security management system. A lot of businesses will say that it's integral, it's part of their culture, that we're always trying to improve. But ways of trying to evidence that can be through results of internal audits. It can be results of feedback from forums where staff are able to sort of raise concerns or raise ideas that can filter through into opportunities in that respect. So it's just bearing that in mind that yes, you have to include that within your policy, but you also need to demonstrate, that there is some kind of continual improvement activity, that's evidenceable. It also needs to be something that's available, documented information, which sounds a strange thing to say, but what that actually means is that it can either be done as a physical hard copy document, that people are provided with and need to sign, or in most cases is something that's done electronically, and it's available on a SharePoint site or an internal intranet. But the key thing is to bear in mind that the next element of a requirement of the policy is that it's communicated within the organization. So if you've made the decision to use SharePoint or internal intranet site, it's a good idea to sort of identify how that is communicated to staff. Now, typically this will be when somebody new joins the business, you go through some sort of induction. that's an opportunity to communicate the policy. But also you need to bear in mind that your existing staff need to be able to receive communication of that policy. And that might be on an annual basis, just as a refresher, a reminder, by the way, folks, we've got these key policies that, we need to abide by. And again, if you want to go down the route of having a hard copy, because some businesses like to have these things displayed in notice boards or in the reception area, perfectly fine to do that. It's just something you've got to be aware of. If you do have a hard copy that's on display, you've got to remember to update that, whenever you've had a chance to review the policy, or there's a change to the policy, or it's been recommunicated. So it's just bearing that in mind if you're going to go down that particular route. And the final final element is that it's available to interested parties. Now, that's essentially, you're looking at, okay, who is the audience of that policy? So your employees, are a key audience of that, but also you've got external interested parties like your customers. It might be stakeholders. It might be potential new business from a tendering perspective. And what you need to do is just assess, okay, are we comfortable with that information on that policy to be provided externally? And that's why I say if a business goes down the route of capturing all their information security objectives within the policy, that might be something that is a little too sensitive, perhaps too much intellectual property to share at any request. So it's just have a think about that. And what I see a lot of is companies say it's available to interested parties upon request. So that gives the business a chance to think, okay, are we comfortable with sharing that information? Do we need to perhaps create a sanitized version, a statement, that just kind of covers off the core elements of what the policy requirements are? And that's something that, they're happily to share, freely on request. Or the alternative is that it's something that you share in person. So maybe over a meeting or a video call. So there's a representative of the company there when that document is being shared, just to ensure that, there is no concern about information, being divulged when it shouldn't be. So they are typically the checkpoints that you would run through in terms of what you should have in your information security policy.
Thanks, Fraser. So I think we understand the what of what needs to be in your information security policy, but I think another important thing to understand when you're trying to develop one is why. So what is the purpose of an information security policy?
So again, great question. Obviously, we've touched on it's a key element of an ISMS. So we have to do this if we're going to go down that particular route. And the fact that it's a requirement and it's central to the management system. But I believe it kind of goes beyond that in terms of it's a linkage between a company's strategy and then how they are about to deliver that strategy and how they can bring employees on board in terms of supporting that and achieving that. And I say it's the linkage because you can set your objectives within the policies framework or the approach that you want to take from that particular policy. And then those objectives are what actually filter down to everybody within the business. And then they can then see where their part is to play within the delivery of that policy and therefore, in the delivery of the information security strategy. So for me, that's essentially, its key purpose is that linkage between the business strategy and how we're actually going to deliver that on a day-to-day basis so that everybody is involved and everybody is working to the same page in that respect and delivering to the same goals.
Absolutely. And that's the most important thing at the end of the day, isn't it? Everyone needs to be on the same page. Yeah.
I mean, because it is a requirement, it's often looked at as a tick box exercise. Well, we just create a document, we just copy these bullet points and issue it. Yes, that works to a certain extent, but if you want to change your approach to information security from a cultural perspective, you need to ensure that that policy is absolutely aligned to your business, and it does make sense to everybody in the business, and they can kind of relate to where they fit into that policy, and that's where the objectives, are very, very helpful from that perspective. Because yes, everybody can agree that we want to protect things from a confidentiality, integrity, and availability perspective. But what does that actually mean to you in your day-to-day work? And that's where you can kind of progress that through the objectives so that it makes sense to everybody, from an everyday perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Frazer, for taking the time to talk to me today. And for anyone that wants to learn a little bit more about this topic, Frazer's written a really great blog that's on our website, urmconsulting.com, called Developing an ISO 27001 Information Security Policy. So please go and check that out. And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.